Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, if we ever needed a real-life example that the National Party is confused and out of touch, then the announcement of the Parliamentary Palace Part 2 is it. If we ever needed a real-life example that you can't believe everything that falls out of the mouth of John Key, then yesterday's question time and his answers to Ron Mark are the example that should be held up. Let's be clear. Yesterday, in question time, the Prime Minister suggested that when Ron Mark queried about the ownership of Bowen House and how it came to be sold out of the public hands, the Prime Minister suggested that it was done by the national government from the 96 to 99 period, of which the Right Honourable Winston Peters was part. Now, let's just make sure we record history correctly, shall we? Now, some way I don't blame Mr Key, because Mr Key wasn't around. He was too busy making money off the share market, trading on the Kiwi dollar at the time. So he had his head down and he might not have known what the facts actually are. But let's be clear, in 1997, listen up, National Party backbenchers, because this is real history. This is the history according to the Hansard, not according to your speechwriters. The Right Honourable Winston Peters blocked an attempt to sell or to build a parliamentary palace. As the Treasurer, and due to the Asian economic crisis, he rejected a new building because taxpayers already owned Bowen House. The very fact that he did that is why the National Party caucus, part of it under the leadership of Jenny Shipley, threw over Jim Bolger, broke their word in a 1996 coalition agreement with New Zealand First not to sell any more public assets, but because they were dedicated to making sure that they followed this ideology, they destroyed their own caucus to actually create this ability to sell. So in 1998, so here we are, Mr Prime Minister, have a listen, Winston Peters was no longer part of that national-led government. There had been a coup, Jim Bolger was gone, Jenny Shipley was in place, and in 1998, the following buildings were sold: Bowen House, Bowen State Building, Charles Ferguson Building, St Paul's Square, Defence House, Freiburg Building, State Services Commission Building, Vogel Building, William Clayton Building. How much do you think the taxpayer got? How much do you think the taxpayer got for the package? For the package, $59.7 million. $59.7 million. In 2013, how much was Bowen House sold for by the private owners of that building? $62 million alone, close to $63 million. Now, the Prime Minister seems to have had some sort of epiphany now. He's talking about, it says here, the Prime Minister is being quoted as saying, it just makes sense long-term for us to own these premises. Oh my goodness, it's like Groundhog Day. You could take the Right Honourable Winston Peters' speeches from back then in 97 saying that it makes no sense whatsoever to sell a building that is owned by the New Zealand taxpayer that has a guaranteed tenant, off into private hands. But no. Jenny Shipley and the national government, and they don't appear to have learnt very much, had no problem with it. The Right Honourable Winston Peters and New Zealand First was wrong, didn't understand business, didn't understand the economy. Off they go and sold all those buildings. Now, and what's even weirder is, if we tie that into the Kiwi Bank adverts at the moment, who's seen the new Kiwi Bank adverts at the moment? We got some New Zealanders' faces projected up on buildings saying, hey, are you banking with Kiwi Bank? Because we're not a foreign-owned bank and our profits don't go offshore. Oh my giddy aunt. Oh my giddy aunt. It's like straight out of the New Zealand First manifesto. Who was it who stood up with the privatisation of the banks, of the Bank of New Zealand and other banks into offshore hands, and said, now all the profits are going to go offshore? And you know who's the appointed chair of Kiwi Bank? Jim Bolger. Crikey dick. The guy that said we shouldn't own our own bank now is part of the campaign to try and get New Zealanders to recognise that when they bank with a foreign-owned bank, their profits go offshore. Now, New Zealand First, I'll guarantee you, is the only political party that all their accounts are held with Kiwi Bank to make sure that we support the only New Zealand-owned bank, or government-owned bank, TSB, take your point, owned bank here on these shores. So, sir, it's like Groundhog Day over here. If this government would only listen to New Zealand First in the first instance, you could stop repeating stuff.
Speaker.
Catherine.